Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public session of the Committee of the Whole meeting for the Halton District School Board on May 22nd, 2024. Please be advised that the meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on the hdsb.ca and on the HDSB YouTube channel. The Board of Trustees will have a special board meeting following tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting. Tonight, we have trustees joining us online and in person. Online, we have Trustee Baxter and Daniele, and joining us in person are Trustees Bryden, Rocha, Amos, Chair Collard, Trustee Zhang, Shuttleworth, and Gray. Director Ennis, can you please note which staff are in attendance tonight?
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Oliver. We have the appropriate staff here to support the items on the agenda tonight.
Thank you. Tonight, we'll have Trustee Shuttleworth do the honoring of the land.
Thank you. We begin by acknowledging the land and our responsibility to care for and respect all that provides us with life. This land, upon which the HDSB is situated, is on the ancestral treaty and title lands of the Anishinaabeg, Ojibwe, Mississauga Nation, now known as Mississaugas of the Credit. Mississauga territory in the past and present continues to host both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. The HDSB is committed to continuous knowledge building with respect to actions that address and resolve the ongoing impact of colonialism. We do this by learning and understanding the true history, treaty obligations, duties, and responsibility, and Indigenous rights while actively maintaining mutual beneficial relationships and collectively respecting and caring for the land.
Thank you. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Trustee Gray, would you like to move a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, I would.
Are there any objections to approving tonight's agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. On to declarations of possible conflict of interest. In relation to our agenda this evening, are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda items. We have two items. We have the approval of the April 17th Committee of the Whole meeting minutes, and under information items, we have 5 administrative procedures. I'll put the motion on the floor. Be it resolved that the board approve the consent agenda action items and receive information items as listed on the May 22nd, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting agenda. Trustee Baxter, would you like to move the motion to deal with the consent agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay. Are there any items that need to be pulled for discussion? I don't see any. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved by unanimous consent. On to item 4.0, discussion items. We've got 3 policies, couple of procedures, and 2 reports. Starting with item 4.1 under policies. Item 4.1.1, risk management. And we'll ask Superintendent Ngoy to speak to that.
Thank you. And through the Vice Chair, there are minor changes to the risk management policy and administrative procedure, and you can just see in the marked version. And one item has been struck at the end because it's actually being referred to in the last bullet just above. And just for trustees' information, as we go into the fall and we have a new multi-year plan and strategic priorities, we're going to have a risk assessment exercise and go through our corporate risk profile to see if those are still indeed our top risks or if they've changed the risk tolerance of the board, if that is still the same as 4 years ago. So we'll go through a renewing exercise in the fall once the multi-year plan has been finalized. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Superintendent Ngoy? Trustee Zhang.
Thank you. I read the procedure, and I believe the procedure should be this is like a guideline to we need to follow for step by step to guide our practice. In other organizations, because I understand this is an update, we already have one. This is an update, but other organizations like the financial industry, usually we handle. Those organizations handle the risks in different level and in different categories. For example, the operational risks, legal risks, financial risks, even the external risks. So, should we? I just want to get some idea. Should we have make the risk more detailed and for in each category and handle that in different way? For example, the legal risks and the operational risks. For example, like natural disaster and business continuity, we need to handle and assess in different way. So this is just my some idea. Just seek input from others. Thank you.
Would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. So the risk management policy and administrative procedure refers to the strategic risk management framework that the board has approved. And it looks for those key risks that facilitate or limit our ability to achieve our strategic priorities. And we do have a corporate risk profile that is shared with the audit committee and the board of trustees in private session that we monitor those just high key risk areas. And then through the organization, we have different risk mitigating factors, as you mentioned, in terms of legal exposure, financial liability, et cetera, and through insurance. And we deal with that separately and adapt to the market. So we have annual reviews with our providers and insurers in order to make sure that we're mitigating those risks. We do have business continuity / the disaster recovery plan as well that is being tested annually and also in collaboration with other institutions locally, just trying to have that backup plan in case something happens like a natural disaster. So those are being addressed as well. This in particular is looking at all the risks that are the key risks that are impacting our ability to achieve the strategic priorities. And how do we manage them and report annually to the audit committee and through the audit committee to the board of trustees in terms of any changes in that risk profile.
Okay, thank you. That answered the question. And that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Shuttleworth.
Thank you. So Roxanne, I do have one question and I don't know if it applies this or not, but I thought at the end of all of our policies, we were creating links to specific pieces of the multi-year plan. Am I wrong?
So there's a new template there as well in the clean template. I do not believe it's linked to the multi-year plan section still. I could be wrong.
Am I dreaming? Were we not looking at with policies, and this could be a dream in my head that I don't remember, but were we not looking at specific pieces of the multi-year plan that related to
I think Chair Collard might have an answer for you.
Thank you.
Hi, we're looking at linking reports
Yes.
to the multi-year plan,
that's what it
not
is.
policies, because the multi-year plan has an expiry date.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions relating to this policy? Seeing none, we'll move on to 4.1.2, Board Governance Bylaw. And that's the Governance Document Review Committee. Over to you, Trustee Bryden.
Thank you. In the bylaw, you will see a handful of changes tied into the premise that we are no longer committing ourselves to meet on Wednesdays. And so the bylaw had previously specified the inaugural meetings would fall on Wednesdays. So here we've only highlighted the portions in the markup copy that are being changed. And so this says just simply within 7 days, which is consistent with the Act. And then there's also a piece inserted about professional development opportunities, which is there to assure that annually we will provide a governance professional development session for trustees.
Okay, I see there's a question from Trustee Rocha.
A couple of questions. In section 4.2.1, the modified wording, it now says within 7 days after the day on which the term of office of the board commences. I'm going to assume that's calendar days. Okay, would we be able to add the term calendar just for clarity? And then there's another instance of 7 days as well in 4.2.4. The other question I have.
As the current version is taken straight from the Act.
Yeah.
So in the Act, it says 7 days.
Yeah. I figured that was the case, but I know that sometimes when you go through our documents, it's not always clear whether it's business days, calendar days. So even though I know it's from the Act, just for us, for clarity. Anyway, those are my thoughts, but I'm open to what everybody else thinks. So I noticed that in section 4.5.1, the time has increased from 96 to 120 hours. So I want to say thank you for that. I want to ask will this also be true for our committee of the whole meetings? I see Amy nodding yes.
Yes, that is.
Okay, so I'm assuming a change will be forthcoming to reflect consistency. Okay, perfect. The other, I have a comment, and I know it wasn't part of this update, but just to bring it out there. So the very first line in the document says Part 2, members of the Board of Trustees. The wording is redundant only because members are trustees. So the title should either read members of the board or members of the board and in brackets trustees, because members means trustee. So there's just redundancy in the title. So maybe if we can clean up that one line since we're in there making changes anyway. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments relating to this policy? Chair Collard.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a couple of the pieces in here. As Robbie alluded to, 7 days is the phrasing used in the Act, so we decided to stick with using that same phrasing. It doesn't matter to me if we put calendar in front of it or not. If we put calendar in front and that's not what the Act intended, then we're still doing better than what the Act asks for. So it's a moot point as far as I'm concerned. So I'm happy to put calendar in front. We did have some other changes in there as well to the reports requiring 2 presentations. Operational plan has been crossed out. We're not even sure if we should be voting on the operational plan, let alone having it come twice. The operational plan says right in the title that it's operational. And so that was something that even if we're supposed to vote on it, probably shouldn't be coming twice. But I want to make sure that trustees are okay with that. Also, there are changes to the structure of the agendas for special board meetings and board meetings, in that the private session comes at the end of the meeting. So this is just to line up with the changes that we made. and that the agendas for regular meetings shall use as a guideline the form provided in the appendix. And the reason why that's been put in there is because quite often there are items in the agenda form that we don't use. So if we're not speaking to a particular item, it probably shouldn't have a title still in the agenda. For instance, if we have no monitoring reports in the consent agenda, we don't keep it in the agenda. So that was just for clarity and to tidy things up a little bit. There were no other changes that I can spot as I run through it. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to 4.1.3, school naming and renaming. Governance Document Review Committee. Trustee Bryden.
Thank you. There are two items consecutively on the agenda here relating to the policy and the governance procedure. The policy has only cosmetic changes to it, but one of those cosmetic changes is actually useful in the governance procedure in numbering the subsections 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. One of those gets cited in the GP. May I proceed in the agenda? In the governance procedure, there are much more significant changes. Most of them tied to the renaming process rather than the naming process. There are a couple of notes within the naming process, particularly around names that come from particular groups. Beyond that, I will not try to rehash all that is within the renaming process, and we'll take any questions and go from here.
Okay, we do have a speakers list. Over to you, Margot.
Thanks, Joanna. So just, Robbie, one piece on the governance procedure. In that you have the change schools names reflecting traditionally marginalized groups. So the term traditionally marginalized groups, I don't think is the best way to speak of that. Maybe unrepresented minority is probably less, because marginalized makes you think of a lesser. So I just think that maybe we should look at the wording of that term and adjust it, please. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, and next up, Tanya.
Yes, so going to the policy, I noticed that the numbering was added 2.1 to 2.3. Then I also noticed that the letters that were there, A through E, have been replaced with bullets. I know all the bullets look prettier. Sometimes when we're trying to refer to a document, it's always easier to name the bullet. So for example, if I wanted to talk about 2.1, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth bullet, so instead of having to count and name it, the fourth bullet, it would be much easier to say, well, can we look at 2.1D? To me, it's cleaner, it's more specific, and there's less room for error when trying to refer to something. So if we could revert back to using letters or numbers, that would be my suggestion. And then when it comes to the governance procedure, I have a lot of notes, and I'm not sure how we want to handle this. So would it be okay to go through the different sections, and I could talk to my queries?
Let me just check. Robbie, how would you like to proceed?
For the ones that are grammatical or otherwise cosmetic, please send those to us in written form. Yep. For the ones that are substantive, we'd be very happy to hear those.
Yeah, so nothing grammatical or I'll leave that afterwards. So where do I want to start? Okay, so in the governance procedure, section 2, one second paragraph, third bullet, but fourth bullet. Well, see, this is why we need numbering here. I'm not sure, what do you want to call this line here? Okay, where it says a verification of information included in the nomination form. I'm not sure I know what that means. So I was hoping that someone could explain what that meant.
That means that whatever has been written in the nomination form needs to be vetted for accuracy and to ensure that nothing has been misstated, that no assumptions were made. Like for example, let's say we wanted to name a school after someone who'd been in some legal troubles but never convicted of something, and someone in their nomination presented this person as having never had legal difficulties. We would know different, and so that would be inaccurate.
Okay. I think I understand that. So two lines later, there's a line in there. I don't know if this is meant for discussion. It's if you're looking at the markup copy, it's in blue and it's underlined. It reads, OHRC engages the public to develop a new policy on the discriminatory displays of names, words, and images.
This is a news item from 2021. When the OHRC was looking at this and they wanted to establish a committee, and they never did. And that was in there as a source document when we were trying to figure out how we wanted to word what we had in the governance procedure. We were trying to go to the best source. And so that was there as a reference point for us. And I left it in to the copy so that we could have this very discussion.
Okay. So that line won't be in there.
It won't be in there.
Okay, perfect. The next question. Okay, the next few comments are cosmetic or grammar, so I'll just save that for later. Okay. Okay, if we go to the second page, section 5, board resolution, the second paragraph reads, if the motion passes, the resolution shall be binding. If the motion fails, the above procedure shall be repeated. When it refers to the above procedure, how many steps back are we going in this procedure? Are we going back to step 1, step 2? Like how far back are we going?
I'm sorry, where are you on that?
Section 5, second paragraph. It's if the motion fails, the above procedure shall be repeated until such time as the motion for the approval of the name receives the majority approval. So I'm just wondering, how far back are we going in the procedure? Are we going back to
The first paragraph under 5. No. Right, okay, it needs to be defined.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you. So then the next paragraph in pink, it refers to in the event the name used in the motion does not receive the support of a majority of votes cast, the remaining name shall become the name used. So is that not redundant? Because if the name's not used, that meant the motion failed. So
Yeah, what that means is you've gotten down to 2 names, and there's now a vote happening, and the vote, for some reason, there is no majority. So the majority that didn't happen for the first name, so then you try the second name to see if you will get a majority.
But that contradicts what's in section 4, because in section 4, it talks about where there are only 2 shortlisted names, eventually one shall become the name used in the board motion. So
Right.
we're down to
So
one.
it got down to 1, and it was put into the motion, and then a trustee changed their mind and didn't support it.
But this refers to the remaining name. There is no remaining name because they've all been voted out.
Okay, but it also says in there of the 2 shortlisted names. So the one that's remaining of the 2 that were in the final.
So maybe can we use different wording so that
Yeah.
it's clear that we have to go
Yeah.
back to step 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Margot?
So just checking, because that almost sounds like, and I'm a little bit confused because this was something we had a discussion with earlier. This almost sounds like if you have choices, you have to pick one.
No.
So there is a choice. If you have those 2 remaining names and one's out, the next one is not used. Okay.
It's only used in a motion. If no names pass in a motion, then there is, this is for a school naming, not a renaming. It goes back to the committee, right?
So if it goes back to the committee, that's not what this is saying. This is saying it's going back to the list of the shortlisted names.
Right, but if none of them passes a motion, so you bring forward, you get down to 2 names, you bring the first one forward, there's no majority. You bring the second one forward, there's still no majority, then it goes back to committee. Because obviously there was no name that was good enough to receive a majority.
Yeah, because it says if neither of the top 2 shortlisted
Yeah.
names receive support, the director
Okay,
will
but-
convene the school name.
Because there's a difference between getting down to being the last name and actually passing in a motion to become the name.
Okay, so let me talk this through. So there are 5 names. We dwindle it down to 4, to 3, to 2, to 1. So that one name is going to come to the board. HDSB shall name SodaStream School, well, X School SodaStream, because we dwindled it down to that. So it comes down to a vote. So on a good day, we would all vote in favor because it made it down to number 1. But what you're saying is, if the last name standing fails at a motion, what happens? What you're saying, the way it's written, it says it's going to go back to the second name that was left. But we had already eliminated it. So why would we go back to the name we eliminated?
I'll speak to this. In section 4, the procedure for a tied vote at the prior stage is that the director draws a ballot. And so that section in section 5 exists so that if the tie was broken by a drawn ballot, and we're casting a motion because the director drew one name out of a hat, then when if the first one fails, we go to the second one. The second one still qualifies, and we can ask about that one. And if that one doesn't receive majority support either, then it goes back to the naming committee at that point.
So can we say that here?
I think we could be more clear about that. That's the specific circumstance in which that procedure happens. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. All right. Now, page 3. And I think this is where we ran into problems in March, where there was a misunderstanding of terminology. So this third page refers to requests to initiate the review of a school name. But we're also dubbing this the renaming GP. My request would be to relook at section 6 and break it down into 2 sections. One, to request to review a school name, and what does that entail? And then have another section called initiating a school name change, so that it's very clear that part A would be, we're entertaining your request to review the name. We're not actually going to do it. We're going to entertain the idea. We're going to do our due diligence. We're going to do whatever we have to do to determine, yeah, you know what, we really should look into this, versus, no, we're not entertaining this. It doesn't meet any criteria. Case dismissed. So if it goes beyond the sniff test and it does meet the criteria, then we can say, how would we initiate the renaming? At which point it does come to the board for a vote, because all the research, there's enough research there done that would warrant the change. So I have a lot of comments and notes, and I don't know if we want to go through it here, or perhaps if the governance document review committee would be open, could we maybe have a separate meeting to discuss some of those ideas, or?
Two thoughts. First off, I like the suggestion to split this into 2 sections. I think that's will greatly add to the clarity. To the point of discussing this further, either the easiest way would be for an individual trustee to attend a GDR meeting where this is on the agenda, and we can coordinate schedules around making that happen.
I would be very happy to attend one of the meetings if it goes back on the agenda.
All right, thank you. And Amy?
Yeah, I also agree with splitting 6 into 2 pieces. It makes a lot of sense. And I too think would be a great idea, Tanya, if you wanted to join us for our next meeting, because this will be coming back. We knew that there would be comments, and that's why there's another meeting in between now and the next board meeting. And so, yeah, you're more than welcome to join us for that meeting. And if we have to change the schedule to do that, we will.
Thank you.
Do you have any other things you wanted to add in before?
I won't waste anyone's time. I'll leave it for the GDR meeting.
Okay.
All right, thank you for this discussion. I too am in support of splitting out that section. I think our experience has shown us some of the deficiencies in our original procedure, and I think that this will greatly improve our process. So thank you for that work. Okay, we'll move on to 4.2.2, appointments to committees and other roles, and that's Governance Document Review Committee. Robbie.
So in this document, the major change is in regards to the shifting timelines around OPSPA directors and DPH co-chairs. And there are a couple additional changes along the way, including the removal of language tied to the specific day of the week, flipping public and private sessions, and a little note about if the vice chair is absent during committee of the whole, that the chair will typically stand as running the meeting unless the chair is not present.
Are there any questions or comments regarding this procedure? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4.3, and that's a report from General Manager Francie and the Director. Short list of names for Milton Southwest Number 12 Public School. And over to you, Heather.
Thanks. Through the Vice Chair, Milton Southwest Number 12 Public School will open in fall 2024 as a kindergarten to grade 8 school. To name this new school, a school naming committee was established in accordance with the board's naming and renaming schools administrative procedure, school naming and renaming policy, and school naming and renaming governance procedure. And this committee was formed to gather student and community input and shortlist potential names for the school. Promotional campaign was conducted earlier this year to gather input from the community, and more than 1,000 names were submitted. After reviewing all of these submissions and meeting as a committee to engage in discussion, the school naming committee puts forth the following shortlist of names: Cedar Ridge, Chow Kuen Lee, Harmony Grove, Marianne Shad, and Milton Meadows. Research and the committee's rationale for selecting these names is included in the report. This evening, the report's being presented for discussion, and then the report will come back to the board on June 5th. I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this report and your presentation. Are there any questions or comments for Heather or the director? Okay, Amy.
Thank you. I really like the way this is written up. Giving the committee rationale as well as the research makes me understand the committee's mindset when they were going through it, and that's very helpful because they are representing the community in great part. I am really liking some of these names, and I'm going to have a hard time choosing. Thanks.
Okay. Tanya.
Yeah, so for clarity, where was it? The name Harmony Grove, is that a name that someone just made up? Or is there an area actually called Harmony Grove?
Based on the rationale provided by the individual who submitted it, it does seem like a term that they have coined based on the rationale that they provided. In our research, we didn't find that it was a name of a specific place. It is commonly used for residential areas and developments, but no specific area.
Okay, so if I can make a request, when the report comes to board, if you can include that this was a coined term, so something someone made up, that would be great. The next one, I guess I'm also looking for the term Milton Meadows. Is this an existing term that's being used in Milton? Or was this to someone submitted a combination of words to make up the term Milton Meadows?
For Milton Meadows, we found in our research that it is being used to describe nearby subdivisions under development in Milton. So this one I wouldn't say is a coined term. I do think that that's where it came from.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jean.
Thank you very much. My comments were very much Trustee Collard's comments. I find the list very intriguing and with lots of variety, and it will be a very difficult decision to make. I did have a question, though, of the committee, two questions perhaps. I note that the committee consisted of a parent, just going to go up there, parent representative, member of the school council at Rattlesnake feeder school for Milton Southwest. Is that parent then to be the parent of a school child who will attend the new school?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And my second question was, of the 1,000+ names that were submitted, how many were duplicates? In other words, how many different names were submitted? Was it 500 came in of the same name and a variety thereafter?
I don't have an exact figure for you, but I can get one. There were duplicates included in the figure of over 1,000, though.
My last point here is just a comment. I think it speaks well to the fact that the community would submit such a large number of names and be engaged in this process. So kudos to the folks who participated in this process. Thank you.
Margot.
Thanks, Joanna. So I have two questions coming from questions from my fellow trustees. So first off, Tanya asked about the Milton Meadows question, and you said that it's a term that's being used for other subdivisions being built within Milton?
Yeah, in our research, we found that they're currently under development.
So my concern with that is that if it's not in that particular area, are we concerned about Confusion, right. So just like I just think about when, actually I'm not even going to say going on that road. That's just something I was thinking about. But then my second question is coming from Jean when she spoke about the parent who was from Rattlesnake Point. Do we know if this parent gathered ideas from the school or was bringing just her own personal opinion or bringing opinions from the community?
Good question. The parent rep, speaking on behalf of parents on this, so they're a representative of the school council and parents who will attend the new school. So before bringing their recommendations forward to the committee at large, they gathered the feedback from members of their school council and parents who will attend the new school so that that feedback informed their own decision-making that they brought forth to the committee. And then to answer your first question, we can look into Milton Meadows' name a little bit more to try and get a sense of where exactly those areas are.
Yeah, I just figured that if there's an area like 3 kilometers away called Milton Meadows Subdivision and somebody's trying to find the school, they will automatically go in that general area only to find that Milton Meadows School is in Rattlesnake Point, whatever. But just following up on the question about the parent. So were they only looking at Rattlesnake Ridge School feedback, or were they all going to other schools as well? So that's just one feeder school, or the others as well? So
there's actually only one feeder school for Milton 12, and that's Rattlesnake Point. So in accordance with the AP, you would have a parent rep from all of the feeder schools, but there's only one. So this parent rep gathered the feedback from the school council at Rattlesnake Point and parents who they know of who will be attending the new school.
Okay, great, thanks.
Tanya, did you have another question? Okay.
Yep. Okay. So all this information you've just shared with us, Heather, that would be great if it could be captured in the report so that we know where the information has been or the feedback's been coming from. The other thing is, could we include the address for Milton Southwest in the report so that we know where it is? Because to Margot's point, this was an issue that came up the last time we wanted to name a Milton school, where it was nowhere in the vicinity of the name proposed. Like it made no sense to name that school that name because it was nowhere near it. So I want to make sure that if we really want to consider that name, we should know the location of the school, just to see if it makes sense.
Absolutely. It is 815 Kennedy Circle, and I can send trustees a map to show you where that is too.
So if I could ask, would we be able to include that information as part of the report so that we can get a very fulsome report to show where the school is? If you want to include the map, that would be great. Thanks.
Definitely.
So what I'm hearing is a suggestion to perhaps check in with Milton Planning Department about any proposed or already existing developments with the name of Milton Meadow. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments for Heather? That's great. Thank you. Okay, and we'll move on to item 4.4, and that's the 2024-25 budget. Over to you, Superintendent Ngoy.
All right. So we do have a presentation with lots of details, which break out the draft budget, but we're going to go through just the first few slides, which outline the key proposed savings and efficiencies that we've discussed to date and any changes since then. As trustees have been part of many discussions so far. But for the public and for trustees, there's all the details that we have typically during the draft budget are included in this presentation. And just last, we'll have just a quick overview of the projections for this year. At the same time with the budget, we also look as to where we think we're going to end this current year. So that is also part of this presentation just at the end. So myself and Jay will walk you through just the first few slides that outline the updates to revenue expenses, the proposed and revised reductions and additions, and just where we think we're going to end the year in terms of the proposed deficit and one-time items in the in-year elimination plan. So do you want to walk us through the revenue?
All right, so I'll walk us through our draft revenue table here as of last week. So we've gone through all the ministry forms to figure out what our funding level is, and it is shown here on the table. So the first line is our core education funding. So it's projected to be $829 million. This is an increase of almost $40 million over current year's funding. Now, the vast majority of this is related to Bill 124 remedy, as well as labor provision. So it does have offsetting costs on the salary side of things on the expense budget. The second line here is a reduction of almost $4.2 million in our responsive education program funding. So the main REP for short that is discontinuing is the de-streaming supports for next year. Otherwise, we still have the reading supports for next year, as well as others such as math strategy that are continuing on for next year. The other line to highlight is the other fees and revenues, third from the bottom here. It's an increase of a little over $43 million. Now, the vast majority of this, almost $42 million, is related to education development charges. So it shows it as an increase over the current year because of being in a surplus for current year. Next year, we would expect to have land transactions, so we would recognize the revenue in next year's financials. So that's what makes up the large majority of this increase. And just to note, this is an out-of-compliance revenue source, so we can't use it to balance our budget. So moving on to the next slide. I already touched on a few of these items on this list, but just key revenue highlights. I won't go through everything, but essentially it summarizes some of the increases or decreases in our revenue, whether it's the core education funding or education program others, or non-ministry funding. So if there's any questions on revenue, we can move on to the expense side of things. All right, so for expenses, the total expense budget is expected to be about $920 million. It's an increase of a little over 35 million over the current year. Again, the vast majority of this is related to compensation for Bill 24 remedy as well as labor provision. While there's some lesser increases for amortization of assets and increases to department budgets. The next slide here highlights and summarizes the main increases that I just spoke about. So the top box here lists the salary benefit increases or decreases for a total of 36.5 million, and the second box highlights the non-salary increases or decreases, which in summary is a decrease of almost 1.5 million. And again, a lot of this is related to funding that is discontinuing or has not been confirmed at this point, or roll forward budgets from our current year.
And what I just wanted to highlight, when we look at the increase in revenue for core education funding of almost 40 million, that sounds like such a big number, like great news. But when we look on the budget side and you're looking at the fact that we have pretty much 47 million in increases in salary alone, salary and benefits alone. So taking away the net reductions, because those are savings and efficiencies we're making to balance the budget. So if you take away that 10.9 million, you get to about 47 million. But our entire core funding increase was 39 million. And we lost 4 million out of the REP funding. So that's where you put it into perspective that yes, there's a big increase, but there's an even bigger increase on the cost side than it is on the revenue side. So as a result, we have to look at significant reductions in next year's budget.
Do you want questions as we go along? May I? Yeah, I just, a couple screens back, you noted that transportation had increased by 3% in terms of what we received from the government. I just wonder what the expenditure of transportation was. Is it up over 3%?
So the increase in transportation is 1%. And the reason is we've built in savings. So as a result of consolidating some programs and looking for efficiencies, we've pulled everything out that we could in terms of making sure that we maximize everything. So we were able to have only about 1% increase in cost. So that's the one area that looks better. We're still 1.5 million over funding. So we're still spending more than the funding. But we were able to close the gap a little bit, just like the rest of the budget areas where we had significant savings. This was another area where we adopted the same mindset in trying to close that gap.
Robbie?
Back to the slide we were on previously. Responsive education programs and secondments. Can you speak to what's included in that line? Yeah, this one.
So responsive education programs, that's what's currently known as the PPFs. So it's been rebranded. So I mentioned that the large decrease, about 3.3 million here, is the streaming supports PPF that's discontinued. So that's what makes up the large majority of this 4.3. And then there's a couple others that were given throughout the year. One, I believe, was for cybersecurity initiatives for about $500,000. That was also not confirmed to continue. So between those two, we're talking almost 4 million of this.
Sorry, Shani, you had a question as well?
My question is, some funding we have funding from different sources, and I'm very interested in one thing. May not be directly reflecting this chart. So we have an Indigenous education program, and I heard federal government is funding for that. So do we receive funding from federal government? And if we have, and this for this specifically this year, for the new school year, is the funding is increase or decrease? Thank you.
I can speak to that. So there is a portion of Indigenous education funding in the core education funding, but you're talking about federal. So federal, current year, we do receive a small piece of funding to help support one of our identified students and it helps essentially helps pay for an EA to support that student. But it is application based, and we don't have that funding for next year unless we apply for it. So it is up to actually the families to apply for it. But that is the only federal funding we receive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's hold our questions to the slide in question, and please use the Crestron system. Thank you. Okay, continue, please.
All right. I was trying to see if we have the breakdown for the funding allocations later in the revenues, but they've changed the funding, so that isn't split out separately. So in terms of where we were as of the March 20th Committee of the Whole and proposed savings and efficiencies, this is what trustees were presented at the time. So we're looking at mostly staffing efficiencies, so staffing as tight as possible to the mandated and funded class sizes. We're also looking at reducing the central program leads positions. So there's various central teaching positions, e-learning and shift coaches that are being eliminated next year. Elementary size and secondary class size efficiencies, program viability and resizing in special education, the change in structure reading program delivery. So we are reducing 8 structure reading instructional teachers, but we are adding on the next slide 4, 1 lead and 3 coaches in order to pivot how we are continuing that work and closing the behavior resource class. There's some reductions in the student mental health and well-being, and looking at other areas, including school admin supports for secondary schools, as well as some other one-time items that we took out of the budget. So that makes up to a total of 94, just over 94 positions and 10.3 million in targeted reductions. So that hasn't changed from what you were presented. It's just a recap. This is an updated proposed in-year elimination plan. So these are all one-time items, and it will require request from the ministry to allow use of our reserves for 1.8 million. So we try to keep the changes in here so you see what has changed. We did take out the early reading kits because we did have new funding, one-time funding that is about 260,000, I want to say. So almost, what we were putting in here. So that is great news. So it's actually taken off this list, but it is funded. And the upcoming retirements for the positions that are protected by the new protective complement as of November. We now know how many retirements we're expecting. So we were expecting, out of the 8 positions, we were expecting 2 retirements and 6 to be on a placeholder, but there were 3 retirements, so only 5 remain. And we've we are proposing to continue as a 1-year contract the positions of 2 graduation coaches that are currently also contract positions and 1 research officer to continue the good work that they have done over the last couple of years. So that in total comes to 1.85 million. That will be our deficit position and require ministry approval to use our reserves. So I'm not sure if there's any questions on the proposed in-year elimination.
Donna has a question.
Thank you very much. I actually put my hand up for the slide before. I am trying to stick to the slides, as Vice Chair Oliver said. On number 7, I just had 2 very quick questions. The child youth counselors that were, diminishing by 2, how many does that leave us for the system? And then the other piece, and I know we probably talked about this in March, and I just wanted to know what is the plan for the behavior resource class closures? I'm assuming that the numbers in those had dwindled and that there are going to be other resources offered to the students that would have been in those classes.
So we are looking at the staffing question. However, the shift here is we are adding a social worker as their work is now continuing into the into the elementary schools as well. So we're seeing a bit of a shift in how that service is provided for students' well-being. And therefore, we were able to make that shift. So you'll see it in 2 slides later in terms of the proposed additions. And the other question was in regards to which reduction of behavior class? So the behavior class closure, those students are going to be supported in their schools, and there there's built capacity with the staff within those schools.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And Jean,
sorry, just to answer the question about how many CYCs we still have. We have 47 in the budget still.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Jean.
Yes, thank you very much. In the section Other Areas, the very top line is school admin support. I wonder if you could define what that looks like. I'm in a region of Halton where I think half or more than half of the schools are single administrator schools, and so admin support is always welcome, and I just wanting to know what that all entails.
Yeah, through you, Vice Chair Oliver, to Trustee Gray. This line refers to office and clerical support, not administrative support. I believe you were thinking Ps and VPs. So this is the placeholder for potential retirements that we spoke to in slide 8, I believe. So it's not principals and vice principals. Admin as in office support.
And refers to the secondary schools, which have a bigger complement of staff. All right, so with that, here is the revised proposed additions to the budget. When we put everything through, we did add actually a few as we received the funding. There was some additional funding being provided, and we were able to add an instructional program lead for math so that we can keep our current complements. So we were able to confirm that. And 2 psychologists are being added with a new funding that was provided in the core education funding. However, we were not able to maintain the $1 million contingency that we were proposing, so we are crossing that off the list. Otherwise, we would have to find additional reductions. So that will still leave us with a contingency in the budget of $500,000, which is not much for a budget that is approaching $1 billion. All in all, the total additions are about $873,000. This is the staffing proposed for next year, just a summary. There's more detailed employee groups later in the slides for your information. But overall, the way this is structured is looking at where we are today in 23-24 school year. The proposed savings you've seen on that slide, 7, I believe, the 94.33 that we're proposing to cut as a result of savings and efficiencies. Some additions which are mostly funded or the opening of a new school, as well as a placeholder for 5 that are future retirements. So right now it's just a temporary addition, and it's on the in-year elimination plan. And then the funding changes and enrollment decline also result in reductions in additional 46 staffing reductions. So all in all, we're looking at a decrease between the current year and next year of 125.5 full-time equivalent staffing positions.
Margot.
Thank you. So this could be a question for you, or it could be a question for Sari. I'm not sure. So with these reductions in teachers, I'm just wondering in terms of we are collapsing things such as the behavior support class, which would make me wonder about class size when we have these more diverse populations within classrooms. So with these reductions, where are our class sizes sitting in relation to support, particularly for students who have challenges that may be coming from a self-contained environment before, to ensure success? We always want to ensure success for our students.
So through you, Vice Chair Oliver, to Trustee Shuttleworth, I can start and then I can turn it over to Superintendent Nagoy. So at this point, we don't have the final scorecard in terms of our class size. Obviously, we are bound by the class size regulation for the various divisions, elementary and secondary. What we can tell you at this point is we have staffed traditionally well below the class size requirements and caps in both elementary and secondary, while maintaining compliance, obviously. The changes that we are implementing specifically focus on how we staff our FDK class sizes and special education. With special education, the changes are incremental. In other words, the increase in the class size has been incremental in terms of its implementation. What I mean by that is, for instance, self-contained class sizes, the regulation allows you to staff up to 16 students, for example, and we have traditionally staffed to 8 students, which is great. Obviously, it's better for students, it's better for staff, but obviously, given the tight budget position that we're in, we're having to staff a bit higher in terms of the class size. So in this sense, the class sizes right now are being staffed to a ratio of 10 in certain class sizes on the special education side, and in some instances to 12 in CPP programs. In FDK, we're staffing to the maximum allowed by the regulation, and that is 29 in FDK. Obviously, if the class size is above 15, you're having to have a DEC in there. But you're getting to a point now where class sizes, you're going to have certain classes of 15 or less, and classes of well above 25, i.e. a DCE is in the classroom. So we're moving away from parity in class size in a particular school. So that's where you will see the difference. But on the special education side, while yes, we're staffing larger, you're having maybe a student or two more than normal. So it's not going to be obviously it's a significant change, but it's incremental in nature. But to answer your initial question, where are we with the class size as far as ministry reporting? We won't get to that point till September 30th of 2024. Once we have our final enrollment number and the reorganization that occurs in the fall. But we can't escape regulation, no matter how tight the budget is. So I don't know if Roxanne...
I have just a little bit of a follow-up on that, just because you're speaking about those specific special education classes, which are the self-contained classes. And I know, and I applaud you for collapsing some of those special education classes and putting the children back into general education classes. However, what my concern is, because they will no longer be in a class that has that label, however, they are coming from a self-contained class, and I'm sure we are being strategic in how we're looking at this, but I just want to ensure that with those students who are coming back into a community classroom with their peers who may have had difficulties and challenges and have been in a self-contained classroom where the ratio of teachers was that much higher than it is now, that we are ensuring that we are wanting success for those children. So if we're having higher class sizes in general classrooms, and we are also looking at collapsing self-contained classrooms to put them back into general education, which I applaud, are we ensuring that we are staffing those classrooms to ensure success for this reintegration of the students? And I don't know that you'll know the answer to that, but it's just something that I hope I see Tina putting up her hand saying, I know the answer. Thank you.
Through Vice Chair Oliver to Trustee Shuttleworth. Yes, so Spec Ed Services, the department, has a plan for that reintegration, and particularly the classes that are being collapsed were never intended to be permanent placements. The idea was always go in for a year or 2 years, and then come back and reintegrate. And so the plan is to maintain students in their home school and resource and build the capacity of the people on site to be able to provide the best possible service for those students rather than leaving and coming back. And sometimes, to be honest, that was kind of like starting over, right?
Great, thank you.
All right. So the main budget pressures, once we've put everything through the ministry forms and we've reworked some of the enveloping, we're looking at the overall increase in statutory benefits for $6 million. So we've actually done an exercise of pulling everybody out in terms of the salary and benefits and working through the adjustments. So we have a more accurate figure in the incremental costs as a result of CPP and EI enhancements. We are over the allocation for temporary accommodations or portable costs by 1.6. Transportation remains over the funding by 1.6. Special education envelope has undergone quite a bit of work in terms of making sure that we are looking at the right revenue being brought into the allocation to address the resources. In particularly, it also contains the student well-being staffing in that cost base. So we wanted to make sure that we allocate the base that is outside in the core education or the classroom allocation in there. So we are still looking at, even after that exercise and the savings and reductions that are being proposed, we are still looking at the cost being over the funding for about $4.1 million. The one item here that we're not able to as easily track because of how the funding has changed is the unfunded portion of supply staff costs. So current year, they're 10.1, and the funding hasn't changed for next year, so our pressure isn't going to be less, it's going to be more. We just aren't able to, through the forums, see how that is driving. So as much as the new funding formula is supposed to be more transparent and easy to follow, this one was collapsed so much that we can't see it. It's not as transparent, actually, the opposite. So we're going to be working with the ministry in trying to understand how we are able to follow some of these pressures through the new funding formula. But we know it's going to be at least what it was this year because we're increasing that budget for next year. And inflation pressures, there's been no change in the learning materials and technology and the outside of the facilities side, there has been no change in those allocations since 2018-19. So we are certainly seeing the compression in terms of the buying power for that funding and for those budget areas. So what does this all mean once we put it in? We've put through our budget, we've put through the reductions we talked to date. We even projected and then we're looking at where we are in terms of our position, and we still had a $6.6 million problem. So as you can imagine, Jay almost lost his cool. So we went back to the drawing board. We had looked at the projected in-year savings for about 3 years before the pandemic and the last 2 years after the pandemic. The average savings that we see between the budget cycle and the year end, they're savings in thousands of accounts. So it's very hard upfront to figure out where they're going to be savings and if they're going to be savings. But on average, about $2 million. So we've parked $2 million savings in there that we would expect to see at year end, as well as our initial $1.5 million in-year deficit elimination plan, which was presented in March. So that still gave us $3.1 million to find. So now we've went back and looked at further reductions, and that's where we reduced the supply budget. So we had brought it up based on trends, but brought it back down $1 million because we just certainly we cannot balance the budget. So we are hoping that we're going to be seeing just marginal increases over the current year. We have reduced the contingency back to $500,000. We were proposing an initial increase in the operating budget for facilities in order to, we have a new school opening, we have increases in utilities and pressures in terms of inflationary pressures on the goods and services in that area. But we brought it back down by $500,000. So they will have to really prioritize the budget in terms of what gets done and what doesn't next year. And then we went through and looked at more savings for transportation, so $200,000 there, reallocated some current resources to additional funding that was announced instead of adding new positions or new things in the budget. And looked at any other reductions in legal and insurance. So all in all, we took out $2.8 million out of the budget and added the $300,000 to the in-year deficit elimination plan, which now made it 1.8, which we presented. So when we look at it this way, this is our ministry compliance form. So as you will see, that middle line is our compliance deficit of $1,805,000 essentially. That is what is on the in-year deficit elimination plan, and it sort of flows through in the unappropriated top line, which is our surplus for a rainy day. Some of the items we have there for student achievement and multi-year plan supports, and some technology and capital project amortization. So that's in a nutshell what we are proposing for our draft budget that will come to board on June 5th. And there's a lot more detail in the slides to follow, but we'll stop there and see if there's any additional questions.
Amy.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how we managed to save $100,000 on insurance when my insurance keeps going up leaps and bounds every year. I'd like to know the secret.
So it will depend on the claim year, and it will depend on mostly what we expect to see in terms of a rebate. So based on how they do provincially and how they also invest, they have investments in terms of their financial plan. If they have a good year, they do provide rebates to the membership. It's a not-for-profit insurance. It's like no other. So it really works with us and for us in terms of a sector. So we've looked at the last rebate that was announced, and we are typically conservative when we expect the next rebate to net off. But for next year, we brought it back to that same level. So we're hoping for a good year for their investments as well.
Margot?
Thank you, and thank you, Robbie. Can you go back one slide, please? So my question is kind of in line with Amy. So we have all these additional reductions made in the draft budget. Are those realistic? So you're talking about these savings, but you're saying people have to be frugal and people have to... Are they're guesses, but are they realistic? So are we going to get to the end of the year and say, well, this is what we wanted to do, but are we going to be able to do it? That's sort of my question when I'm listening to how you were explaining those pieces. Like when you were talking about reduced facility services operating budget, if something's broken, it's going to have to get fixed. So are those realistic numbers is my question.
No. Yeah. They are extremely frugal, and we've had discussions with our staff that we have to be very careful in terms of what we can and cannot do next year. And the messaging will have to be also to the community. What we see with the operating facilities budget, one, you have a backlog of items to be done since the pandemic when things were not maintained and upkept, as well as more wear and tear as a result of increased ventilation requirements. But we have to only address what's key priority, so that's putting a pressure. There's a lot of vandalism, a lot of TikTok challenges that unfortunately cause a lot of damage and repairs in our schools. So I'm really hoping that trends changes, or we may not fix them, and maybe students will appreciate that they don't like the look when it's not repaired, and hopefully that doesn't continue as much. But those are the big pressures. Obviously, if it's an emergency, those are going to be priorities. The concern is $500,000 contingency isn't much for the size of our budget, and we are also parking upfront in-year savings that we hope to materialize. Otherwise, we would have to take away $2 million more. We don't know. We've looked everywhere, and we do not have the capacity to reduce anymore. So we are putting forward a balanced budget, save and accept the $1.8 million of one-time items. But will we be able to stay within it? That is going to be a big challenge. And I'm very concerned. We've just done everything that we can do possibly. So when you're looking at all, we've taken away $10.3 million, but added, $900,000. And then you're looking at all these items we still have to take away, in-year savings, and it's just, you're looking at about $15 million that we could have used in the budget, but had to take away for next year.
So what happens when we come to the end and the contingency, we actually realize we needed more, or we actually spent more on facilities and we spent more on legal, and like some of these pieces to me, what happens? What happens if we come back and we say, well, we actually spent double of what's up there?
So there's another touch point with the revised budget. When we do our revised estimates for December, we would have a much better idea of where we land, how many bums in the seats we have in terms of the students, and that drives, most of our revenue and staffing. We're also looking at how we meet compliance with staffing, because we can budget based on a formula, but the actual allocation school by school and grade by grade provides some limitations in being, efficient as you would be otherwise based on a formula. So we might be coming for revised budget and saying that we have a deficit above and beyond the amount on the in-year deficit elimination plan, and that we might have to go back to the ministry and present the reality and the reasons why. So that's a possibility for sure.
Okay, moving on to Robbie, and thank you for your patience.
I take a slightly different approach at this rather than what if we don't make it. It's what is the consequence of enforcing this limit on spending. And the line that jumps at me is the reduction to the supply staffing budget. If we were budgeting for what we actually expended to spend on supply staff, and then suddenly said, okay, we're going to spend $1 million less, what position is not being filled? How do we achieve that miracle?
So the overall supply staffing budget is an increase year over year. It's just not as much as we have run the trend. So we would expect that the trend goes up a bit more based on just the last few years. So we've tapered that down, and we're hoping it stabilizes. But it's a great question. From a fill perspective, I have to say that's not a decision factor to say we're not going to be staffing this. But we do have some strategies where there's some planning time within secondary schools. There's different ways of using that first before we would go and add supply costs. So all the schools have a little bit of that, and they're very creative of how they allocate their staff that are on the ground first before we add additional supply teaching or EAs or ECEs. So those are a mechanism to contain the cost. but the fill rates will be impacted more on the availability of supply staff for a given day, depending on how many absenteeism is in the system. I'm not sure if Sari would like to comment.
Yeah, through you, Vice Chair Oliver, to Trustee Bryden. So ultimately, absenteeism generates supply costs. And if your organization does a good job of hiring, of having a robust supply list of teachers and educational assistants and DCs and so on, that means your vacancies are being filled, which is a good thing, but that also generates a cost. So in this case, what we're saying is, as we continue to manage our health and wellness, mental health and well-being of staff, permanent staff, we hope that we will see improvement in attendance. In other words, our absenteeism rates would be lower, which would require less supply teachers and education workers, which would result in savings. Having said that, you're absolutely correct. If absenteeism exists, I'm not just talking about sporadic absenteeism, leaves of absences, long-term, that will require supply staff, which are additional costs, and we take pride in our ability to have excellent fill rates. We don't want our classrooms to be without EAs, without teachers, but that comes at a price. So really the key to reduce your supply costs is to improve your attendance, ultimately. Yes, there are ways in which you can create efficiencies. You can cover absenteeism in-house within certain parameters without relying on supply staff. So you can, a teacher may be away, but you can cover it in-house through different means, which would reduce supply costs, but that's not always the case. But yeah, to bank on $1 million in savings and supply costs, you're saying we're really going to do a good job of making sure our teachers come to work happy and healthy, not relying on supply staff and absenteeism. And that's a problem in the entire province.
So then I will take off on Margot's thinking, which is if we will continue to spend, even if we exceed the projected amount, we will pass a budget that is balanced minus potential when you're in your deficit elimination plan. If we exceed in a given category, say a significant one like supply staffing budget, are we then bound to recover that elsewhere in year? Or if we arrive at the end of the year and we've missed our estimate, is it acceptable to have a deficit at the end of the year?
Typically, and we haven't been in a position where we required ministry approval to run a deficit before, but typically you need the approval of the budget cycle, inform them with revised estimates of anything that's changed, especially if it's outside of your control. So if it's a particular year where there's a lot of illness, a lot of viruses out there and everybody gets affected, might really impact that supply cost, it would be an opportunity to say, ministry, we're actually trending $2 million more in supply costs than we expected. This is the reasons why, and we're going to put it through our accumulated surplus, and let us know if you have concerns. They by regulation they approve the budget, not a revise. It's just it's a mechanism of the revise to let them know we're not going to be hitting the target because of items that are not within our control. If they're within our control, the expectation would be that we will look everywhere else to make up for it. And even having said that, we would be looking at what can we not do in order to minimize the impact on the budget. But the supply costs in particular, a lot of it is outside of our control, even despite our best efforts and strategies and return to work program. And so is anything that is emergency in terms of the facility repairs, for example. So there's areas where something could happen that's outside of our control. So we would capture that at revised and inform the ministry.
Okay, we have two more questions, then we'll wrap up this item. So, Kelly.
Thank you. Through you to Roxana. Again, under the additional reductions, when you first made the, estimates about how much would be needed for each of these areas, was it based on what had been done in the past year? Or so it's a historical, based on that, that's how much you judge? Because following along with what Robbie and Margot had said, I mean, I have concerns, especially like the transportation budget. We're already, we were not funded enough already, and it has been reduced with the new formula they've created. And so we're already in a reduction piece, and then you're looking at potentially taking off 0.2 million more. So I'm just having a real hard time seeing, like, I know we have to have a balanced budget, and I know, or a deficit budget, balanced deficit budget, but I'm really concerned that in facilities operating budget, I mean, we have so many old schools that need constant repair, and they should be actually being updated. We're not getting those funding. And the fact that we're having to reduce the actual operating budget without even looking at potential upgrades, I mean, that's an inequity for students who are in the schools that may need those kinds of things. And so, I mean, I have a real concern about us, this piece of it, like the 3.1 million. I mean, I have a real concern that we won't be able to match it, and then we'll be looking somewhere else. And I know that you and the rest of senior admin and your whole team, and you too, Jay, have looked at every possible way that we could reduce as much as we can. And we're already lean, and this is being mean. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I just have a concern that we're not going to be able to survive.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Amy.
It's more of an observation, actually. I've sat through many budget presentations, as have a couple other people at this table. And my experience has been that the person sitting in the hot seat usually projects a very conservative budget. And they do so specifically to make sure that if we overrun in any of those line items, we have the flexibility to absorb that. That's part of the job. And Roxana does it exceedingly well. We actually ended up in a better position at the projected position for the end of this year than we thought we would. And that is in great part due to the hard work of Roxana and her department. And I think we need to keep in mind that they're professional and they know how to create a budget that is not unrealistic, and that they'll be able to take a few dollars from one bucket to help another bucket if they need to, because a budget is a projection, is a forecast, and we never know exactly what's going to happen. What we can do is rely on what's happened in the past and build a budget around that. And I always find it remarkable that at the end of the year, there's always a little bit left over, and we never thought we would see that. So thank you very much, Roxana, and your team, Jay.
Okay, thank you very much. That wraps up this item. Thanks, Roxana. Oh, one more thing.
One more thing right at the end of this is the projection for next year that I just wanted to mention because we do provide that to trustees. Just going to go to the one slide here. So just very quickly, when we're looking at where we think we're going to end this year, we started with a 7.7 million deficit. We believe at this point in time that we will be within compliance and that potentially there'll be about 600,000 savings. There's one caveat though, the funding for the before and after program that comes from the municipality, that includes about 500,000 of additional funding than what we had projected. And we're trying to determine whether or not there was some overfunding or just a change in funding model. So there could be a possibility that that will be returned, but we still expect to be within compliance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Roxana J. and your entire team for this very careful, thoughtful work that that you do every day for us, and especially when you're pulling together the budget. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to the work of our committees, starting with standing committees. Item 5.1.1 is an update from the Board Self-Assessment Committee, which you would have received in advance of this meeting. You'll recall that the committee has met a number of times. It's paid very careful consideration to the survey results and identified some key issues that help to inform our PD sessions and problem-solving discussions at the Committee of the Whole. We've also reviewed a number of other board self-assessment surveys from other jurisdictions and created a draft. Final version will be available shortly, and that survey will be used early in the fall to help inform the work of the subsequent Board Self-Assessment Committee. Our next meeting is in September, and so we are done for this school year. The other members of the committee are Kelly, Shini, and Naveed. And Robbie and I thank everybody for their collaboration and input into this work. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5.1.2, governance document review, and that's Robbie.
No additional updates.
Item 5.1.3, trustees professional development, and that's Carol, please.
Good evening, everyone. Just a quick thank you for filling out yet another availability survey for our next PD session on human rights law, which will be in September. I apologize for all of the back and forth, but we have now settled on a date in September. We will, as discussed, be filling out a spreadsheet that I'm actually going to ask Carolina to help me with because she did such a great job with the governance one, to ask trustees to provide issues and questions for the presenters. We'll do that before the end of the school year and get that off to the presenters so they can be ready for us in September. And I think that's it, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Carol. Any questions for Carol or the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to board committees, and that's director's performance appraisal, and we'll have Jean present.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll be assisted with Carol tonight, who's going to join me in this session. First of all, with the Director of Education Performance Appraisal, you probably know that a new regulation came out. What has changed is that on March the 4th, 2024, the new Reg 83/24, Director of Education Performance Appraisal, VPA, came into effect. Starting in, it's interesting that it would come out in March of 2024, but it affects this current school year, and this is why we are doing a double double duty here, trying to make sure that we comply or in compliance with everything that's requested in this new regulation. So as of this regulation coming out, all publicly funded school boards are required to annually appraise the directors of education based on the mandatory assessment criteria and any additional locally focused priorities identified by a school board. So what does it mean for us? Well, the good news is that we were pretty much in lockstep with the reg as it has come out and what it's requiring of us. It's our time frame that's a little bit off, but we have made some adjustments and have compressed our time frame. We are now, all school boards are required to complete steps. There's 8 steps by the key dates set out in the reg, and the requirements vary depending on the start date of the director. In the documents, the support documents that came out, the technical guides, we have been greatly assisted by them, and we find that the information has been quite complete and very effective. Many of you participated in the ministry training, or at least the webinar on this document, and may have been a little bit disappointed in the lack of the ability to have an interchange of ideas or questions answered and so on and so forth. I would like to let you know that tonight, the director received a Q&A document from the ministry and has shared it, and haven't had a chance even to open it up yet, but it'll be interesting to see all of the questions from around the province that came in with regards to this document, just exactly how the ministry has referred to them. Now, I would like to say that our committee, which consists of Joanna, Carol, and myself, we've been really, really busy. We've been meeting pretty much weekly there for a number of weeks to work on the governance procedure, to address how we would, with the director, how we would proceed through with this new regulation. We set upon ourselves to set up charts and tables and timelines and so on and so forth. We are in a good position, I believe, and we want to share a little bit of information with you tonight as to how we will proceed. Now, earlier today, the document that we're going to review right now, which is a guide for trustees, Carol's going to do that. That was shared earlier today. So if you want to refer to that document on your screens, you can. And I will give this over to Carol right now as we look at really what we will be doing as a group of trustees when we're required to. And after Carol's presentation, I will discuss with you the draft timelines, which again also was shared with you earlier today. So Carol, if you'd like to take it away, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Jean. So you have the document, I hope, in front of you that Jean shared with us earlier today. This is copied and pasted basically from the new regulation, the Director's Performance Appraisal Regulation. I've cleaned up the language just a little bit. There's a lot of referrals, like in any regulation, to various sections and things. So I tried to clean it up to make it a bit more readable. But basically, this is what appears in the regulation as the requirement. First, for the rating. So every director is to be rated by each trustee according to those 4, I guess, settings. I'm not really sure what meets all expectations all the way to does not meet expectations, everything in between. The evaluation criteria is again laid out in the regulation when trustees are evaluating the director's self-performance evaluation. We will be expected to be looking at these points and keeping them in mind and considering them when we do our individual feedback and evaluations. At the very bottom of there's one more thing I'll mention. In this regulation, something that's quite different from what has existed prior is that the Minister of Education has the option to provide feedback in the biannual evaluation, which is what we refer to usually as a 360. So this would be new for our board. And for all boards, I guess, we've never had the Minister of Education providing their input on a 360, but that is now included in this new regulation. So I copied and pasted as well, just at the bottom, what the factors are that the minister will be considering when making their decision to contribute or to provide feedback during that 360, because that was a big question. So what will that be based on? There is a process that's outlined in the regulation whereby the minister has to, by a certain date in the year of the evaluation, the biannual evaluation or 360, the date by which they have to inform the board that the minister will be providing some feedback. And then at the bottom is just 3 links to the various references that are included. So you can go and take a look at those as well. So this was really just designed, or not designed, but I guess intended to help guide us in understanding what's a pretty big regulation. If you click on the link at the bottom, it's quite a long reg with lots of different sort of sections, tables, and that kind of thing, outlining dates. So what we've tried to do as a committee is try to make this as user-friendly as possible by reading through and not interpreting necessarily. That's more for legal counsel if we require that, but to sort of pull out the really important piece of information that we need as we embark on this process. So if there's any questions, Jean and I can certainly attempt to answer those.
And I would just add, just before we address any questions, that Joanna, Carol, and I have taken exceedingly large amounts of time to really go through this reg and really understand where we fit into it, what we must do. One of the things that's alarming to us is that the entire province really could be thrown into the requirements of needing to do a 360 next year. And we, as you recall, we did a 360 last fall, and when we put an RFP out, only had initially one company that responded, and now there's criteria where the companies that can respond has to have had at least 5 years in the industry doing such work. And so I just want you to know that our group has very much been aggressive on this, working with David Bennett, and we've already got our RFP out and in circulation with responses due back mid-June, because we think that we'll be up against all the other boards looking for a company or an entity that can perform this work. So it's been a long amount of work, but I want to assure everyone that what we've been doing already is not that far a departure. It really is just a really difficult year that we have because of the time frame. We had in our plans to finish our performance appraisal sometime next fall, and now we're having to compress it. The absolute maximum date would be August the 15th, but we're compressing it into the beginning of the summer. Reason being that it's the availability of staff to be able to pull off a board meeting where the resolution has to come before a board, and just the whole concept that none of us saw this coming. And so I'm about, if there's no questions on Carol's, I'm about to go over the draft timelines, seeking your input. So would there be any questions? Seeing none, let's look at the draft timeline. That too came into your inbox today, and you'll see that we have, again, very much compressed the schedule, where the director thought he was going to have the summer, the entire summer, and then produce a report for us in September. Now he's having to work in a way that will produce for us his self-evaluation report by no later than Tuesday, July the 2nd, giving all of the trustees a chance of 5 working days, it looks like, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, to provide comments to myself, the DPRC chair this year. And then we will, as a committee, take your comments and summarize them, providing a report that would inform the Director of Education's performance plan, but also become the appraisal report and complete with appraisal ranking. We'd be looking to share that with the Director of Education. Again, he would be using that report to help tweak anything he thought was necessary in the performance plan, and then he would be sharing his performance plan. And this is where we get to stages 5 and 6. I think I identified that. This is a question that our committee has for the Board of Trustees, and that is not in the regulation, is that the Board of Trustees submit comments about next year's performance plan, but rather that it could sit with the committee to produce comments about the performance plan. We have built it in so that we would go to the Board of Trustees for your comments, but if you wish to eliminate steps 5 and 6, we could do that. You'll see that we have this whole timeline draft being finalized and being resulting in a final meeting, a special board meeting for resolution, passing the resolution. Is it somewhere either Monday the 16th, Monday the 15th, Tuesday the 16th, or Wednesday the 17th? And I think a survey went out today to find out people's availability. Again, for that meeting, I might just mention that not everyone would need to be in the meeting personally. You could be online for that meeting. We would just need to have the director and the chair in the room, along with the technical expertise and support that would allow that special board meeting to take place. So, with that, and recognizing that you would have a responsibility in that first week of July to give some input, and then you would be receiving a summary report, and then being asked to potentially, if you wished, to submit comments on the performance plan for next year, and then coming together for that board meeting, that special board meeting on those dates. That's what we have as a proposal, compressing it as much as we can, working with the director, finding a spot where we can make this work together, working with Carolina to make sure that she has staff available to pull off that special meeting, and having this all wrap up as early maybe perhaps as Monday the 15th or as late as Wednesday the 17th. So at this point I would end and look for any questions or any comments, or even your thoughts on steps 5 and 6, if you believe that to be, though it's not in the reg, as I mentioned, where you see that as a very necessary step for our Board of Trustees versus just having the DPA committee make comments on the performance plan. So I open up the floor.
Thank you very much, Jean, for that very great and comprehensive report. We have a question from Amy.
Thank you. I always like to go above and beyond what the ministry asks for. The minimum standard just isn't good enough for Halton. Okay. So item 5, where you have the Board of Trustees submitting our comments, I think those who wish to will, and those who do not wish to won't. And so it's good to have that in there. There's no harm in having that in there. And if a few people decide that they want to, and a few people decide that they don't want to, that's fine too. I see no problem with that. It's a very aggressive timeline, and I thank you, all three of you, for the amount of work that you've put into this. I know how much work it is, and I can't imagine having fewer months to do it in, especially when you started at the first of the year thinking you had a full year. So yeah, this is incredible work, and thank you for everything you've put together.
Robbie.
Thank you. I recognize this timeline speaks to this particular condensed year when we've been handed an ultimatum. It's going to be a challenge, whatever way that happens. I'm actually more interested in what happens on a permanent basis, and in thinking forward to next year and the following year, and whether the performance appraisal regularly sits in a special summer meeting, or whether we consider appending this to what we were looking at as a special budget meeting in June, could also include director's performance appraisal, and that would be wrapped up before summer arrives. And then the next issue is what happens in an election year, and how we There are some benefits in the shift of the schedule to working with the school year, which makes a lot more sense from a director's perspective, I think. And the director can speak to that if he wants to, but it's what we've been handed. Previously, we were aligned to the trustees' year. And 3 out of 4 years following the school year makes sense. And 1 year, when there's an election, it's going to be a challenge. And we just need to think about how we want to operate that for the next board coming in.
Jean, did you want to respond?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Carol. I think she has some thoughts maybe on this as well. We as a committee have discussed this and that we would be having every intention to work with the director to see if we couldn't wrap up the performance appraisal within the June time period of 2025. You make a really good point, though. We really need to map this out and look at how this looks in an election year where the performance plan is already in place as of August the 15th. The director's rolling through, and perhaps a whole new slate of trustees come aboard the board and are then charged with running the rest of the process through. It will be very challenging, I think, and it's something that we can take into account. And I look at Carol to get any of your comments and thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jean. So that is something we discussed just with respect to the DPA committee formation and looking at the way we form our committees. And so we've had that discussion around how an election year would impact. Also having an election year when there is a 360 due. So we did have those conversations. As with regard to the rest of the dates, we haven't really dug into that too much. That's to come. Our focus right now was to get us through this year and meet this deadline for this year being August 15th, which we're way ahead of, which is great. In terms of moving all of the work into June or into the school year, that again is I think I perceive the greatest pressure there to be on the director. And I think we've mentioned the committee, and that's great. It's been great working with the committee. I think we should also call out that Director Ennis has been very patient and working with us on dates, and we're going back and forth with different ideas and timelines and that kind of thing. So just wanted to express on behalf of the committee appreciation for his work with us on this. I think we're working as a team, and as you sort of alluded to, Robbie, we're working with what we've got. and I think what we've discovered, as Jean mentioned, is that the process that we've been using is really not that much different than what the ministry is asking for. It's just shifting the dates a little bit. So performance plan, we've always called goals, that kind of thing. So it's not a huge change for our board, but definitely shifting the dates in the coming years to make this work better with summer schedules is something that we should certainly discuss. But recognizing that that is increasing the pressure time-wise on the director primarily, and also on staff. So, we didn't have a lot of time to discuss these things this year. We're just sort of getting it done. But it would be great to have more fulsome discussion in the fall about how we want next year to look and going forward.
Following up on a point that Carol made there, we are set up to stagger with regular 2-year 360s. Every other 360 currently would fall in the year following an election. Thus a transition potentially in leadership. So I haven't gone through the reg with a fine-tooth comb, but the escape, if we are required to do one every 2 years, and there is no limit on doing one more frequently, the escape hatch would be we do one in back-to-back years and get ourselves off cycle as a potential if we wanted to really avoid that. But that's not a decision to make now. That is an idea to throw out that we can consider down the road.
All right, thanks, Robbie. And Tanya.
I'm trying to make sense of step 7 if we don't do optional steps 5 and 6. And so I know Amy is of the mind that we should exceed expectations and I'm of the mind, do we really need to do it? So let's say we don't do steps 5 and 6, and we go straight to 7. 7 reads that the committee meets with the director to finalize the performance plan. So how do we go from step 4, which is the committee receives the plan from the director, to step 7, which the committee meets with the director to finalize the plan? So I'm just trying to, what's happening? I'm not.
Jean, are you able to
I'm a
answer?
little lost.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the regulation reads that the committee would receive the performance plan and then would add comments, just the committee people would add their comments and give some input to the director, and so that the director then would finalize his plan. Our point is, should it just be the committee giving the points? Should it not be everyone? And so that's where it looks like that there is the DPRC meets with and then it reads, I think it's the DPRC chair and at least one committee member meets with the director of education to finalize the performance plan. So there is, in other words, that the regulation builds in for input from the Board of Trustees, whether it be through your committee or whether it be through all of the Board of Trustees.
Okay, so what you're asking us tonight is, do we want steps 5 and 6 so that feedback comes from the trustees? And if we say no to 5 and 6, then the feedback is only going to come from the committee.
Correct. But I think, as we heard, a solution to that would be to keep that open for the Board of Trustees. Those that wish to produce comment may do so, and those that wish not to can decline. So the thought here tonight is that, go one step further, allow that to be, good information flowing through to your committee, your DPA committee, to have more eyes on. And for those that want to contribute, fine. For those that don't, that's fine as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and Amy.
So I have a bunch of things that I just wanted to raise. I'm going to start with what we're calling the committee. The tradition here in Halton is that all trustees are on the Director's Performance Appraisal Committee, and that we have chairs, co-chairs that lead it. But every single one of us is on the committee. So if we're going to use phrasing that includes the word committee, and also use phrasing that has Board of Trustees, we're being redundant. We have the co-chairs, which do this work that you've been doing, and then we have the committee, which is all of us. Okay, so perhaps a little bit clearer language in there would really help. In an election year, September would come along, we would be doing our thing that we have to do, where we decide who the DPA co-chairs are going to be. An election happens, none of them are reelected. Well, if none of them were reelected and we hadn't made that determination, we would still have to go to striking committees anyway. So it would be decided in November rather than September, but we would do it in September anyway, assuming that some of them, at least, will be reelected. But we never have any guarantees of that in any election year. So it's similar to the decision that we're now going to be making in May about the OPSPA director. It's supposed to be for a full year, but in an election year, it might not be. That's just the way that it's going to have to go. Interesting bit about the granularity of the dates now is that the very first GP that we had, which was actually a polyproc, because we didn't have GPs back then, stipulated dates. And then when the various iterations came out through the years, They took the dates out because they thought it was too prescriptive. So now we're going to be putting the dates back in, and it just tickles my funny bone. As for being off cycle, we will not always know how long a term our directors are going to have. Our current director has a 5-year term. If he extends by 1 or 2 or 3 years, that puts him into a different situation. The next director might take a 3-year term. They don't get a DPA 360 until they're in their 2nd year. So we can't fix it because the cycle is never going to be identical from director to director. I think those are all of the points that I wanted to hit, and I see that there are other people that wish to speak.
All right, thanks, Amy. Carol, you wanted to say something?
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in to answer one question about the committee size. So the regulation is actually quite prescriptive now about the DPA committee. There is to be a minimum of 3 members, which was great to read because we have that. So well done, us. But there can be no more than 7. So that's a departure from what we were doing before. There is built into the regulation the requirement for all trustees to participate in the process and for there to be input, opportunities for input from all trustees, but the committee itself, when we're referring to that, cannot have more than 7 trustees on it.
Thank you for that clarification, Carol. Any other questions or comments for Jean Carroll? Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we will leave steps 5 and 6 in for full Board of Trustees input into the performance plan for the incoming year. We will share some deadlines so that those who choose not to participate can let us know immediately so that the committee is not waiting for input that might not arrive, and that will help us to stick to our timelines and get the work done. Jean, final comments?
Yeah, I think the director had maybe his hand up, and then I'll follow the director.
Oh, no. No, I was just echoing many of the comments I heard tonight that it is my desire to work collaboratively with the Board of Trustees, and I want to thank Carol and Jean and Joanna for the work that they have done so far. And to Amy's point, they've done a tremendous amount of work. And, I look forward to the process. It's a bit messy because I think there's a lot of, boards grappling with this, and everyone is sort of trying to make it work. The document that I forwarded to the committee members this evening, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I just saw a couple of the questions asking about the timelines, and the ministry was clear. The regulation is the regulation. So you make it work kind of thing. So it will be, a bit fluid, if you will, in trying to navigate it, but I'm sure we will get through it. So thank you.
And if I may, the one thing that Carol and I spoke about earlier today was determining the date of that board meeting. And we currently have 3 potential dates that were proposed: the Monday, the Tuesday, or the Wednesday. We recognize it needs really to be a night meeting because of the fact that we do have some people that are working in the summer. But again, we don't see it as being a long meeting, and people can attend the meeting from off-site. So is it possible for us to determine tonight which of those 3 dates? And I'm looking to Carolina, if assuming that all 3 dates work for your staff in support of this meeting.
Through you, Vice Chair Oliver. Yes, all those 3 dates have been booked in I've reserved the boardroom for all those 3 dates. I will make myself available, and I think we can confirm further for technology, the technology pieces, but it should be doable.
Okay, Carol.
So we did put out a bit of a survey today, and we're looking for responses from 10 trustees. Amy has to be there and has already confirmed in person and has already confirmed that any of those 3 days are good for her. So we're looking for responses from 10 trustees in total, and I've received 8. At this point, out of the 8 who have responded, 7 are available on the Wednesday. That's the best date for everyone. It is important that we have quorum, obviously. We're hoping to set this meeting date and get that work done. We do have a deadline. So there are a couple of trustees who have indicated that they're going to try their best, but they won't necessarily be in a spot with the most reliable internet connection. So we're trying to pick the date that has the largest number of trustees potentially available so that we will meet quorum. And at this point, we're looking at Wednesday, July 17th is the best option for that. And if the 2 remaining trustees who haven't answered the survey could do that, I think we should be able to set our date.
Thank you. And Carol was referring to a survey that or an email with a link to a survey that she shared. Was it earlier today, Carol?
Yes.
Yes. So for those of you who did not have a chance, please click on the survey and indicate your dates. And Carolina.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, so received confirmation that all 3 dates work. In looking at your timelines, I think the Wednesday would be the best date anyways, just given the compressed time in case you need any buffer for finalizing some of those pieces. So.
Okay.
So we can establish then the 17th tonight, right?
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Great discussion. And we will now move on to item 6.0, trustee questions and comments. Seeing none. Oh, seeing Amy. Amy.
So as you all know, the AGM for OPSPA is coming up very quickly. And we are supposed to have chosen our Board of Members director from our board by June the 4th. I did do an indication of interest email about a week and a half ago. I have only received from one person an indication of interest. And I reminded folks in my weekly on Sunday that this was something that was open. Is there anyone other than Jean who is interested in being the Board of Director member for OPSPA for this year? Seeing none, Jean will be our Board of Director member for the next 12 months. Thank you very much, Jean, and congratulations. We will ratify that in public session at our board meeting on the 5th of June, but now we know who we are sending. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, for putting your name forward. And thanks for all the great work you've been doing with OPSPA on our behalf. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from trustees? Seeing none, the agenda has now been exhausted. The time is 8:14 and I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome to the public board meeting for May